There are voices that define generations. Voices that become part of our childhood memories, woven into the fabric of our most cherished moments. The voice that sang to us about raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens. The voice that taught us that a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. That voice belonged to Julie Andrews, and for decades it seemed untouchable, eternal, practically perfect in every way. But what if I told you that behind that flawless facade, behind that radiant smile we all came to love, there was a darkness so profound, a pain so crushing, that it would have broken most people. At 90 years old, Dame Julie Andrews is finally ready to share the truth about the tragedy she's been carrying for decades. And I have to warn you, what you're about to discover will forever change the way you watch The Sound of Music. Picture this. It's 1997. Julie Andrews is at the peak of her career, starring on Broadway in Victor/Victoria, a role that earned her critical acclaim and reminded everyone why she was one of the most talented performers alive. Night after night, she takes the stage, delivering performances that leave audiences breathless. But something is wrong. Her voice, that crystal-clear instrument that had captivated millions, is faltering. There's a rasp where there used to be purity, a strain where there used to be effortlessness. She's been diagnosed with a small, benign lesion on her vocal cords. Nothing serious, the doctors assured her. A routine procedure, they said. She'll be singing again in no time, they promised. Julie Andrews walked into that operating room as one of the greatest singers in the world. She woke up as someone who would never sing the same way again. But before we dive into that life-altering moment, we need to go back. Way back. Because the truth is, Julie Andrews' story has always been about survival, about taking unimaginable pain and transforming it into something beautiful. And it all started in a small town in England, in a house where innocence went to die. Julia Elizabeth Wells was born on October 1st, 1935, in Walton-on-Thames, Surrey, England. If you're imagining a privileged childhood filled with music lessons and some grand estate, think again. Julie grew up in poverty during one of the darkest periods in modern history. Her father, Ted Wells, was a gentle schoolteacher who adored his daughter. Her mother, Barbara Ward Morris, was a talented pianist who performed in local shows. For the first few years of Julie's life, despite the financial struggles, there was love. There was laughter. There was music. And then everything fell apart. The Second World War began, tearing through Europe like a wildfire. And at the same time, Julie's parents' marriage disintegrated. Her mother and father divorced when Julie was just 4 years old. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Barbara didn't remain single for long. She married a man named Ted Andrews, a singer who performed in pubs and music halls. On the surface, this seemed like it could be a good thing. After all, both Barbara and Ted Andrews were involved in music. Surely, this would be a harmonious household. But Julie would later describe her stepfather as violent and an alcoholic. The family lived in what Julie called a bad slum area of London, and the war years were a very black period in her life. But wait, it gets worse. Much worse. When Julie was just 9 years old, something happened that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Her stepfather, this man who was supposed to protect her, allegedly forced her to sleep in the same bed with him when her mother was away. Let that sink in for a moment. A 9-year-old girl, in the midst of a world war, bombs falling on London, being subjected to abuse by the very person who should have kept her safe. Julie has spoken about this trauma carefully over the years, never going into explicit detail, but making it clear that her stepfather's behavior was inappropriate and damaging. She's described feeling powerless, trapped, unable to tell anyone what was happening. And here's the truly heartbreaking part. Her mother, who should have been her protector, was struggling with her own demons. Barbara Andrews became an alcoholic herself, often drunk and unavailable to her daughter. The chaos in that household was unimaginable. Violence, addiction, abuse, all playing out against the backdrop of Nazi bombs raining down on London. For most children, this would have been the end of their story. The trauma would have consumed them. But Julie Andrews discovered something that would become her salvation. Her voice. When Ted Andrews wasn't being abusive, he was a vocal coach. And he recognized something extraordinary in his stepdaughter. Julie had a voice unlike anything he'd ever heard. At just 7 years old, she could hit notes that trained opera singers spent years trying to reach. Her range was phenomenal, spanning 4 octaves with crystal clarity. And so, in one of life's cruelest ironies, the man who abused Julie also became the person who trained her voice. The escape she found in singing became inextricably linked with her abuser. Can you imagine what that must have been like? Finding your one source of joy, your one escape from the hell of your daily life, and having it forever associated with the person who hurt you most? But Julie did what survivors do. She compartmentalized. She took the one good thing she could get from that nightmare situation, and she ran with it. She sang her heart out, not for Ted Andrews, not for her absent mother, but for herself. Because when she sang, she could be anywhere else. She could be anyone else. She could escape the cramped, bomb-damaged house in the London slums. She could escape the sound of her mother's drunken arguments and her stepfather's violent outbursts. She could escape the air raid sirens and the terror of wondering if tonight would be the night a bomb hit their house. By the age of 12, Julie Andrews made her professional stage debut. Think about that. 12 years old. While most kids were worrying about homework and playground politics, Julie was performing professionally, helping to support her dysfunctional family. And she was extraordinary. Audiences couldn't believe what they were hearing. This young girl with the face of an angel had the voice of a seasoned professional. But behind that angelic face was a child who had seen and experienced things no child should ever have to endure. And here's something that will break your heart. Julie discovered when she was 14 that the father she'd known and loved, Ted Wells, wasn't actually her biological father. Her real father was a family friend. The man she called Dad, the one source of genuine love and kindness in her early life, wasn't related to her at all. And her biological father? He had simply walked away, letting someone else raise his daughter while she grew up in an abusive household. The betrayal cut deep. Everything Julie thought she knew about her identity, about where she came from, was a lie. But she kept singing, and she kept surviving. In 1954, at just 18 years old, Julie Andrews made her Broadway debut in The Boyfriend. She was an instant sensation. American audiences fell in love with her, this proper English girl with the incredible voice and that indefinable quality that made you unable to look away when she was on stage. 3 years later, she starred in My Fair Lady on Broadway, playing Eliza Doolittle opposite Rex Harrison's Henry Higgins. The show was a phenomenon. Julie Andrews became a star. But here's where the story takes another painful turn. When it came time to make the film version of My Fair Lady, the role that Julie had originated, the role that she'd made famous, was given to Audrey Hepburn. Julie was deemed not famous enough for the movies. The rejection stung. She'd poured her heart and soul into that role for years, and she wasn't even considered for the film. Most people would have been devastated, defeated, ready to give up. But remember, this was Julie Andrews, the woman who survived an abusive childhood, who turned trauma into triumph. She didn't give up. She got vindicated. In 1964, while Audrey Hepburn was filming My Fair Lady, Julie Andrews was making a little movie called Mary Poppins. You might have heard of it. When both films were released, something remarkable happened. The public fell head over heels in love with Julie Andrews as Mary Poppins. Her performance was magical, capturing the hearts of children and adults around the world. She made us believe in magic and possibility and the power of kindness. At the Academy Awards that year, both Julie Andrews and Audrey Hepburn were present. Audrey wasn't even nominated for My Fair Lady, largely because everyone knew her singing had been dubbed. But Julie Andrews? She won the Oscar for Best Actress for Mary Poppins. When she accepted her award, she famously thanked all those who made this possible, especially Jack Warner, the producer who had rejected her for My Fair Lady. It was the classiest, most perfect revenge in Hollywood history. The girl who wasn't good enough for the movies had just won the biggest prize in cinema. The following year, Julie Andrews starred in The Sound of Music, and the world as she knew it changed forever. The film became a cultural phenomenon, one of the highest-grossing movies of all time. The soundtrack sold millions of copies. Children around the world learned to sing Do-Re-Mi. Julie Andrews became not just a star, but an icon. She was grace personified, wholesome, pure, the ideal everyone aspired to be. And yet, no one knew about the darkness in her past. No one knew about the abused little girl who still lived inside her, the one who had learned to sing to escape her nightmares. Julie's first marriage to set designer Tony Walton produced a daughter, Emma Kate Walton, in 1962. But the pressures of fame, of constant travel, of trying to balance a career and motherhood, took their toll. The marriage ended in divorce in 1967. As a single mother, Julie faced judgment and criticism in a way that male actors never did. How could she be a good mother when she was always working? How could she maintain her perfect image while going through a messy divorce? The scrutiny was relentless. But then, in 1969, Julie Andrews married Blake Edwards, the renowned director behind Breakfast at Tiffany's and the Pink Panther films. Blake had his own demons, his own struggles with depression and addiction. But together, they found something that had eluded both of them: a partnership built on genuine understanding and love. Blake already had 2 children from his previous marriage, Jennifer and Jeffrey, and Julie embraced them as her own. But Julie and Blake wanted to have a child together. They tried, and they tried, and they failed. Month after month, the disappointment mounted. Here was Julie Andrews, beloved by millions of children around the world, unable to have more children of her own. The universe can be cruel in its ironies. But Julie and Blake decided to turn their disappointment into something beautiful. In 1974 and 1975, during the Vietnam War, they adopted 2 Vietnamese daughters, Amy and Joanna. These little girls had been orphaned by the war, facing uncertain futures in a country torn apart by conflict. Julie and Blake brought them home and gave them a family. The public loved this story. It fit perfectly with Julie's image as the perfect, nurturing woman who took care of everyone. But what the public didn't see were the challenges of raising adopted children who had experienced trauma, of blending a family of 5 children from different backgrounds, of maintaining a career while trying to be present for all of them. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Julie Andrews continued to work steadily, but she never quite recaptured the magic of Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music. She made movies that didn't perform well at the box office. Critics began to say she was too wholesome, too pure, not interesting enough for modern audiences. The image that had made her a star was now holding her back. She tried to break away from it, taking on more adult roles, even baring her breasts in the film S.B., directed by her husband. It was shocking. The world's most wholesome actress showing nudity? But even that didn't change public perception. Julie Andrews was typecast, trapped in an image that she could never escape. And then, in the 1990s, something remarkable happened. Julie made a triumphant return to Broadway in Victor/Victoria, playing a woman pretending to be a man pretending to be a woman. It was complicated, sophisticated, and allowed Julie to showcase her full range of talents. The show was a hit. Julie Andrews was back on top. She was nominated for a Tony Award, and everyone said she was a shoo-in to win. But Julie Andrews did something that shocked Broadway. She withdrew her nomination in protest because she felt the show itself and her fellow cast members had been snubbed. It was a move of principle and solidarity that cost her personally, but earned her enormous respect. And she continued performing in Victor/Victoria, 8 shows a week, pouring everything she had into every performance. But by 1997, Julie started noticing problems with her voice. There was a hoarseness that wouldn't go away, a difficulty hitting certain notes that had once come so easily. She saw doctors and was diagnosed with non-cancerous nodules on her vocal cords. The recommendation was surgery to remove them. It was supposed to be routine, straightforward, nothing to worry about. Julie Andrews trusted the medical professionals. She had faith that everything would be fine. She had no reason to think otherwise. After all, many singers had undergone similar procedures and returned to performing without issue. On the day of the surgery, Julie's family waited anxiously but optimistically. Blake Edwards held her hand before she went under anesthesia. Her daughters waited to hear that everything had gone well. The surgery was performed at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. The surgeon who performed the procedure was considered an expert in his field. Everything should have been fine. Everything should have gone according to plan. But when Julie Andrews woke up from that surgery, she knew immediately that something was terribly, horribly wrong. Her throat felt different. Not just sore from the surgery, but fundamentally altered in a way that filled her with dread. When she tried to speak, the voice that came out was not her own. It was raspy, strained, unrecognizable. The doctors tried to reassure her. "It's just post-surgical swelling," they said. "Give it time to heal," they said. "It will get better," they promised. But weeks passed, then months, and Julie's voice didn't improve. In fact, it got worse. The crystal-clear soprano that had defined her career, that 4-octave range that had made her one of the greatest singers in the world, was gone. Not diminished. Not damaged. Gone. Julie Andrews, the voice that gave us Mary Poppins and Maria Von Trapp, could no longer sing. And here's the truly devastating part. Julie would later discover that she never actually had nodules on her vocal cords. What she had was a small, weak spot, but nothing that required surgery. The procedure that was supposed to help her had instead permanently damaged her vocal cords, leaving them scarred and unable to function as they once had. She had been misdiagnosed. The surgery had been unnecessary, and now it was irreversible. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? Your entire identity, everything you've built your life around, everything that saved you from the darkest moments of your childhood, taken away in an instant because of a medical mistake? Julie Andrews didn't just lose her singing voice. She lost the one thing that had always been there for her, the one constant in a life filled with upheaval and pain. Singing had saved her from her abusive stepfather. It had lifted her out of poverty. It had healed her through her parents' divorce and her mother's alcoholism. It had been her therapy, her escape, her reason for existing. And now it was gone. Julie Andrews fell into a deep depression. She's been remarkably candid about this in recent years, describing how she felt like she was grieving a death. Because that's what it was. The death of a fundamental part of herself. She couldn't listen to recordings of her own voice without breaking down. She couldn't watch The Sound of Music or Mary Poppins. Hearing what she used to sound like, knowing she would never sound that way again, was unbearable. Her family rallied around her. Blake Edwards, her husband of nearly 30 years, became her rock. He understood what it meant to lose your creative voice, having dealt with his own struggles in Hollywood. Her daughters supported her, reminding her that she was so much more than just a voice. But nothing could fill the void. Nothing could make the pain go away. Julie Andrews did what many people in her position would do. She got angry. She filed a malpractice lawsuit against the doctors and the hospital. The legal battle was long and brutal, dragging on for years. Medical experts testified. Records were examined. The intimate details of Julie's medical procedures were made public. It was humiliating and exhausting, but Julie persisted because she wanted accountability. She wanted the truth to come out. And eventually, in 2003, Julie Andrews won her lawsuit, receiving a multi-million-dollar settlement. But no amount of money could give her back what she'd lost. All the money in the world couldn't repair her damaged vocal cords. The settlement was an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but it wasn't healing. It wasn't closure. It was just money. And Julie Andrews had never done any of this for money. She'd done it for the love of singing, for the joy of using her God-given talent to bring happiness to others. And that was gone forever. So what do you do when the thing that defines you is taken away? How do you move forward when your entire identity has been stolen? Most people would have given up. Most people would have retreated from public life, bitter and broken. But Julie Andrews is not most people. Remember, this is a woman who survived an abusive childhood and turned it into a legendary career. This is a woman who was rejected for My Fair Lady and came back to win an Oscar. This is a woman who has spent her entire life taking tragedy and transforming it into something beautiful. And that's exactly what she did with the loss of her voice. Julie made a conscious decision that she would not let this tragedy define her. She would not be Julie Andrews, the singer who lost her voice. She would be Julie Andrews, the actress, the author, the director, the humanitarian. She would find new ways to use her talents, new ways to contribute to the world. And slowly, painfully, she rebuilt her life and her career. Julie threw herself into acting roles that didn't require singing. She appeared in films like The Princess Diaries alongside Anne Hathaway, playing a regal grandmother figure that introduced her to an entirely new generation of fans. Young people who had never seen Mary Poppins or The Sound of Music fell in love with Julie Andrews through these films. She became a mentor to young actors, sharing her wisdom and experience with generosity and grace. She also returned to her childhood love of writing. Along with her daughter Emma Walton Hamilton, Julie co-authored a series of children's books that became bestsellers. Through these books, she was able to share messages of hope and resilience with children, the same messages that had sustained her through her own difficult childhood. She wrote memoirs, Home and Homework, in which she finally opened up about her traumatic past, her abusive stepfather, her struggles with fame and family. The books were raw and honest, showing a side of Julie Andrews that the public had never seen before. She wasn't Mary Poppins. She wasn't a perfect, untouchable icon. She was a real woman who had experienced real pain and had somehow managed to survive and thrive. Julie also became an advocate for other performers dealing with vocal injuries. She spoke openly about her experience, warning young singers about the risks of vocal surgery and the importance of getting multiple opinions. She wanted to spare others the pain she had endured. Her advocacy work helped change medical practices and raised awareness about vocal health in ways that likely saved countless careers. But here's what really defines Julie Andrews' resilience. Even though she couldn't sing the way she used to, she didn't completely give up on performing with her voice. She learned to work within her new limitations. She found roles that allowed her to speak rather than sing. And in some cases, she found ways to use what remained of her singing voice in carefully controlled circumstances. In The Princess Diaries 2, there's a scene where Julie's character sings. It's brief, and it's not the Julie Andrews of old, but it's there. She didn't let fear of judgment stop her from trying. She didn't let perfectionism keep her from expressing herself in whatever way she still could. That takes courage that most of us can't even imagine. In 2010, Julie faced another devastating loss. Blake Edwards, her husband of 41 years, passed away due to complications from pneumonia. He was 88 years old. Blake had been Julie's partner through everything, her biggest supporter during the darkest days after her vocal surgery. They had weathered Blake's own health issues together, including his struggles with depression and chronic pain. Their marriage had been a true partnership, two creative souls who understood each other's demons and dreams. Losing Blake was like losing a part of herself. But once again, Julie Andrews did what she always does. She grieved, she honored his memory, and then she continued moving forward. She established the Julie Andrews Collection, an imprint of children's books. She continued acting in films and television. She took on voice work, lending her speaking voice to animated characters. She proved that you don't need to be able to sing to make a meaningful contribution to the arts. She proved that reinvention is possible at any age, even after unimaginable loss. In 2019, Julie Andrews appeared at a special event in Los Angeles where Lady Gaga performed a medley of songs from The Sound of Music as a tribute to the 50th anniversary of the film. When Gaga finished, Julie came on stage to embrace her. The audience gave them both a standing ovation. Here were two performers generations apart, both of whom had experienced tremendous pain in their lives, both of whom had used their voices to inspire millions. Gaga spoke about how much Julie Andrews meant to her, how watching The Sound of Music as a child had inspired her own dreams of performing. And Julie graciously accepted the tribute, showing no bitterness about the fact that someone else was singing her songs. That moment crystallized something important. Julie Andrews' legacy isn't just about her voice. It's about what she represents. Resilience, grace under pressure, the ability to find joy even in the darkest circumstances, the courage to keep going when everything seems lost. These are the qualities that define Dame Julie Andrews, not the 4-octave range or the perfect pitch. But let's talk about what Julie has shared more recently, now at age 90, that has truly broken her silence on the tragedies she hid for decades. In interviews and conversations, Julie has opened up about the psychological impact of her childhood abuse in ways she never did before. She's talked about how it affected her relationships, how it made intimacy difficult, how it created trust issues that she struggled with for years. She's revealed that the perfectionism that drove her career, that made her such an incredible performer, was also born from trauma. She felt that if she could just be perfect enough, good enough, talented enough, maybe she would finally be worthy of love and protection. She's discussed the guilt she carried for years about her relationship with her mother, Barbara. Despite everything, despite the alcoholism and the failure to protect her from abuse, Julie loved her mother. But she also resented her. That complicated mix of love and anger is something many children of addicts experience, but rarely talk about publicly. Julie has also revealed how becoming a mother herself forced her to confront her own childhood trauma. When she looked at her own daughters, when she saw their innocence and vulnerability, she was overwhelmed by protective instincts. And she was also overwhelmed by rage at what had been done to her. How could anyone harm a child? How could her mother have let it happen? These were questions that haunted her for decades. At 90, Julie Andrews has reached a place of peace that seemed impossible back in 1997 when she woke up from that surgery and realized her singing voice was gone. She's had nearly 3 decades to process that loss, to grieve, to adapt, to find new ways of expressing herself. She's also had nearly 9 decades to process the trauma of her childhood, to understand how it shaped her, to forgive those who hurt her, and most importantly, to forgive herself for things that were never her fault. In recent interviews, Julie has said something profound. She said that losing her voice, as devastating as it was, forced her to discover other parts of herself that had been overshadowed by her singing. It forced her to prove to herself and the world that she was more than just a voice. It was a gift, she said, even though it certainly didn't feel like one at the time. That perspective, that ability to find meaning and even gratitude in tragedy, is what makes Julie Andrews extraordinary. Not her 4-octave range, not her flawless performances in beloved films, but her indomitable spirit, her refusal to be defeated by circumstances that would have destroyed most people. Julie has also spoken about the importance of telling her story, particularly for other survivors of childhood abuse. For so many years, she kept that pain hidden, partly out of shame, partly out of a desire to protect her public image. But she's come to realize that her silence, while understandable, also contributed to a culture where abuse thrives in the shadows. By speaking out, even at age 90, Julie is helping to break that silence. She's showing other survivors that it's never too late to tell your truth, to seek healing, to refuse to carry shame for things that were done to you. And she's showing that it's possible to have experienced terrible trauma and still live a full, meaningful, successful life. You don't have to let your past define your future. Julie has also become an advocate for arts education, particularly for disadvantaged children. She knows firsthand how transformative access to the arts can be, how singing saved her life when she was a little girl in an abusive household. She wants other children to have that same opportunity, that same escape, that same path to a better future. Through her foundation work and her personal contributions, Julie has helped fund music and theater programs in schools, ensuring that the next generation of kids has access to the healing power of creative expression. Looking back at Julie Andrews' life, what becomes clear is that the tragedy she hid for decades wasn't just one thing. It was a series of tragedies, each one building on the last. The abuse in childhood, the abandonment by her biological father, the pressures of supporting her family from age 12, the betrayal of learning her parentage was a lie, the rejection from My Fair Lady, the struggles of balancing career and motherhood, the failure of her first marriage, the inability to have more biological children, the typecasting that limited her career opportunities, and then the ultimate blow, the loss of her singing voice due to medical malpractice. Any one of these tragedies would be enough to break most people. But Julie Andrews experienced all of them. And she didn't just survive. She thrived. She won Oscars and Tonys and Golden Globes. She was made a Dame Commander of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth. She has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She sold millions of books. She's been married to the love of her life for 41 years before his death. She raised 5 children and has numerous grandchildren who adore her. By any measure, her life has been an extraordinary success. But the cost of that success, the pain she endured along the way, is something the public is only now beginning to fully understand. At 90 years old, Julie Andrews is still active, still contributing, still inspiring. She appeared in the Aquaman films as a voice actor, proving that she can still captivate audiences even without her singing voice. She continues to write and publish books with her daughter. She makes occasional public appearances, always gracious, always elegant, always that perfect mix of warmth and dignity that has defined her public persona for over 70 years. But now, when we see her, we know what lies beneath that gracious exterior. We know about the abused little girl who sang to escape her nightmares. We know about the woman who lost her greatest gift and had to find a way to reinvent herself. We know about the survivor who turned tragedy into triumph, again and again and again. And that knowledge makes her even more remarkable, even more inspiring. Julie Andrews isn't perfect, and she never was. But she's something better than perfect. She's real. She's resilient. She's proof that you can experience unspeakable pain and still choose kindness. You can have your dreams shattered and still find new dreams. You can lose the thing you thought defined you and discover that you're so much more than that one thing. The silence Julie Andrews kept for decades was about protection. Protecting her image, protecting her family, protecting herself from having to relive painful memories every time someone asked about them. But at 90, she's reached a point where the truth matters more than protection, where honesty matters more than image, where helping others by sharing her story matters more than maintaining the myth of Mary Poppins, the perfect nanny who could fix anything with a song and a spoonful of sugar. The real Julie Andrews couldn't fix everything. She couldn't escape her abusive childhood unscathed. She couldn't prevent the medical malpractice that destroyed her singing voice. She couldn't save her husband from the pneumonia that took his life. But what she could do, what she did do, was refuse to let these tragedies have the final word. She took each blow, grieved it, processed it, and then found a way to move forward. She compartmentalized when she needed to, confronted her demons when she was ready, and never, ever gave up. If there's a lesson in Julie Andrews' story, it's this: resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about breaking and finding a way to put yourself back together. It's about discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined you could be. It's about understanding that tragedy and triumph aren't opposites. They're often intertwined in the same life, the same person, the same story. Julie Andrews at 90 is finally free to tell her whole truth, not just the parts that fit the image of perfection. And in doing so, she's given us all a gift. She's shown us that it's possible to survive the unsurvivable. She's shown us that our tragedies don't have to define us. She's shown us that there's always another act, another chapter, another way to contribute and create meaning. The voice that sang to us about favorite things may be gone, but the spirit behind that voice, the indomitable will that turned a traumatized child into one of the most beloved performers in history, that's still here. That will always be here. And that's the real magic of Julie Andrews. Not the 4-octave range or the Oscar or the iconic roles, but the human being who experienced more pain than most of us can imagine and still chose to bring joy to the world. So when Julie Andrews says she's breaking her silence on the tragedy she hid for decades, she's not just talking about one thing. She's talking about a lifetime of tragedies, each one hidden behind that radiant smile, each one carefully compartmentalized so she could continue working, continue performing, continue being the symbol of perfection that the world wanted her to be. But perfection is a prison. And at 90, Julie Andrews has finally broken free. She's claiming her whole story, the dark parts and the light, the triumphs and the tragedies, the moments of glory and the moments of despair. And in doing so, she's become more than an icon. She's become an inspiration to anyone who's ever faced impossible odds, anyone who's ever lost something precious, anyone who's ever wondered if they have the strength to keep going. The answer Julie Andrews shows us is yes. You do have the strength. You might not feel it in the moment. You might be certain that you can't survive one more loss, one more betrayal, one more crushing blow. But you can, and you will. Not because you're unbreakable, but because breaking isn't the end of your story. It's just a chapter. A painful, difficult chapter, but not the final one. Julie Andrews is living proof of that truth. And that's why, at 90 years old, her story still matters. That's why her silence breaking is so significant. That's why we need to hear this truth that she kept hidden for so long. The tragedy Julie Andrews hid wasn't a secret scandal or a shocking revelation. It was something more profound and more universal than that. It was the truth that even people who seem to have perfect lives, even icons who represent everything good and pure and magical, are human beings dealing with pain and trauma and loss. It was the truth that the voice that gave us so much joy came from a place of deep sorrow. It was the truth that Mary Poppins herself needed saving, and spent her whole life trying to save herself while simultaneously bringing magic to everyone else. Now, at 90, Julie Andrews has completed that journey of self-salvation. She's processed her trauma, grieved her losses, and found peace with the life she's lived. And she's sharing that journey with us, not because she needs our pity or sympathy, but because she knows her story has the power to help others who are struggling with their own tragedies. That generosity of spirit, that desire to use her pain to help others, is perhaps Julie Andrews' greatest gift to the world. Greater than her singing, greater than her acting, greater than all the entertainment she's provided over 7 decades of performing. The gift is this: the reminder that we're all stronger than we think we are, that survival is possible even when it seems impossible, and that breaking your silence, finally telling your truth, can be an act of liberation not just for yourself, but for everyone who hears your story and recognizes their own pain in it. So here's to Dame Julie Andrews at 90 years old. Here's to the abused child who became an icon. Here's to the singer who lost her voice and found her true self. Here's to the woman who spent decades carrying secrets and tragedies and has finally laid them down. Here's to the survivor who became a warrior, not through violence or vengeance, but through persistent, relentless grace. And here's to all of us watching her story unfold, finding pieces of ourselves in her journey, learning from her resilience, and discovering that maybe, just maybe, we too can survive whatever tragedies we're hiding. Because if Julie Andrews can do it, If she can experience everything she's experienced and still be standing at 90 years old with dignity and grace and wisdom and peace, then perhaps we all can. That's the real magic of Julie Andrews. Not the singing voice, though that was extraordinary. Not the perfect image, though that was compelling. But the human being underneath it all, flawed and wounded and absolutely indomitable. The woman who breaks her silence at 90, and in doing so, gives permission to all of us to break our own silences, to tell our own truths, and to believe that we too can transform our tragedies into something beautiful. That's Julie Andrews' legacy. And it's practically perfect in every way. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And real, it turns out, is so much better than perfect could ever be.